Hello, everyone. I'm Sandra Kim, the founder and executive director of Everyday Feminism, and I want to first thank you for participating in our webinar on the 5 actions you can take now to prevent your child from being bullied. It's really great to see so many people having registered in our webinar because as we know, bullying is such a pervasive issue in our society, but most of us don't have the information, tools, or support to feel empowered to address it, especially when it's happening to our own child. And that's really why I'm so excited to be partnering with Jamie Utt, the presenter for this webinar. Along with being one of Everyday Feminism's contributing writers, Jamie is the founder and director of education at CivilSchools, a comprehensive bullying prevention program for grades 6 through 12. For almost a decade, Jamie has been working with hundreds of schools across the U.S. to transform their school environment to be more inclusive, bullying-free spaces where every student can fully realize their potential. A former high school teacher and a bullying survivor himself, Jamie has dedicated his life to understanding the true nature of bullying and designing effective programming to eliminate bullying from our schools. So, welcome, Jamie. It's so exciting to have you here, and I know everyone is just can't wait to hear what you have to share.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. Can everybody hear me? Can you do me a favor and raise your hand if you can hear me so that we can make sure that we're all good? Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure that my audio is coming through nice and clear for everybody. Excellent. Thank you so much. Sandra, is there anything else that you wanted to touch base on before we get going?
Nope, I think that's it for now, so take it away.
Great, excellent. Well, first of all, I just want to say how much it means to me that there are so many of you who are willing to take some time in your afternoon or your evening to get together and have a conversation about bullying. It's something that, as was sort of mentioned in my introduction, it's very important to me just because I am a survivor of bullying. I experienced a tremendous amount of bullying and really struggled with that when I was younger, but then also as a high school teacher and somebody who gets to work with schools all over the country, I have seen the impacts of bullying. You know, I've gotten to see it firsthand with the students that I get to teach. So just to get a sense of the group, and I don't know where you all are coming from, I'm going to throw out a general category that your kids might fall into, and then raise your hand if your kids are in that general category. So if you have children who are from kindergarten to 5th grade, raise your hand for me. Okay, so it looks like Emily and, oh, it's moving kind of fast. Steve, Melody, um, and maybe a couple of others here. So it looks like we have a good contingent of folks with younger students. How about if you have students who are in 6th through 8th grade? Raise your hand. 6th through 8th grade. Joanne, looks like has some kids who are 6th through 8th grade. Anybody else with kids in 6th through 8th grade? Okay, excellent. And then how about if you have kids who are in high school, like 9th through 12th grade? Raise your hands. Okay, so it looks like Joanne also has some kids in that age group. A few others. And then lastly, if you have kids who are not yet in school, they're too young that they're not yet attending school, or that have already graduated from school, maybe raise your hands a little bit. Okay, so it looks like we have about 5 different people who have kids in that age group. So one of the things that I will say that's sort of a limitation as we're trying to have the conversation is that we have a tremendous range of age groups here, right? And addressing bullying at, say the kindergarten level is a different thing than addressing it at the high school level. So I will do my best to try to tailor my answers to questions in ways that appeal to everybody who's on the webinar. But just keeping in mind that is one of the important things to remember. And one of the things that I've learned about bullying is that there's not any one size fits all approach that's going to work for every school. And there's that, I can hand you here the 10 things that will definitely make sure that that there's no more bullying in their school. But the thing that I think is hopeful is that when you look at the research, as well as when you start to talk to students who have been bullied, students who've committed bullying behavior, as well as educators who are working in this every day, and parents who are working in this every day, there are a lot of things that we can do that begin to address the problem. But in order to understand that, first we need to begin to understand the nature of bullying as it exists today. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the concept of identity-based bullying. So I use the term identity-based bullying to describe what is often actually going on in bullying behavior. Because when you look at the research that is being done by a wide variety of organizations, including at the Yale School of Education, they've been doing a whole bunch of research into the nature of bullying. What they've found is that in the pretty strong majority of cases, students who are targeted for a very specific aspect of their identity. And that's not true every time, but it's true often enough that uh, I started using the definition that I have shown here before you. So the definition that I use to describe identity-based bullying is targeting another person for regular, sustained violence, harassment, or neglect because of a particular aspect of that person's identity. So let me explain what unpack that a little bit and explain what I mean there. So the first thing that I think is important to pay attention to is the concept of regular and sustained. Occasionally, I will have parents who will reach out to me and they'll say, "Oh, my student was made, or my student is being bullied," and I say, "Okay, well, tell me a little bit about that. What's going on there?" And they'll say, "Oh, well, they were made fun of on the playground today." And in response to that, I'm like, "Oh, absolutely, that's something we need to address. That's completely unacceptable. But we also need to recognize that in like a singular act, for instance, of making fun of somebody or hurting somebody is problematic, but it's not necessarily what we want to be talking about if we're going to look at the problem of bullying. And instead, bullying revolves around something that's regular and sustained, where it's happening over a period of time, targeting a particular person. The next thing that I think it's important to unpack is the concept of violence, harassment, or neglect. A lot of times when people think of bullying, especially how it's portrayed in the media, it's more along the lines of violence. It's like a person who's pushing somebody into a locker or beating somebody up. And that happens, but actually research is indicating that that is happening significantly less often in schools now than other forms of bullying. So just making, calling people names line and in cyberbullying sort of situations, as well as calling them in the hallway or using passive aggressive comments. But then another really common form of bullying is neglect, telling other kids, "Hey, don't hang out with that person because they're stupid or whatever," making fun of them in that way. And trying to make sure that that person feels really socially isolated is a really common aspect of bullying that often gets ignored and isn't talked about. And then the last thing that I'll say within that is that it's important to note that a lot of bullying happens because of a particular aspect of a person's identity. Now, sometimes that might be a more surface level aspect of the identity, such as maybe the things that they're interested in. So maybe they get made fun of because they're really into dance or ballet, or they're really into band or something like that. Maybe that's why they're being targeted. But a lot of times it's also getting much deeper than that and getting into deeper aspects of our identity. And it's related to things like race or religion or gender identity and expression or sexual orientation or class. A very common one, and that I hear from a lot of teachers when I'm doing professional development on this issue, is that it's that there's socioeconomic status that comes into the picture. One of the most common forms of bullying in American schools is also having to do with a person's intellectual or physical ability, right? So the idea being is that the person is being targeted for something that is maybe a core aspect of their identity. So when I'm talking about bullying, that's generally the definition that I am working from, the one that I've got here before you. And in just a second, I'll give you a chance, and Sandra will be able to help me know if you have any questions about that. So if you have questions about that as I'm introducing this next little part, you can put them in the questions box, and Sandra will be able to ask a few of me. But the other thing that's important to understand about modern bullying is the concept of bullying in the age of smartphones. So if you'll do me a favor, raise your hands if your students have a cell, or if your kids, excuse me, have a cell phone, right? So if your kids have iPhone or an Android phone, or just one that only gets text messages, or something along those lines. So if you have that ability, go ahead and click the hand raising thing. So it looks like at least a few of you have students who have cell phones. And the thing that I've been noticing and working with schools around the country is more and more kids are getting cell phones at younger ages. You know, I'm starting to see students getting cell phones and sometimes even smartphones in first grade or second grade. And and so it's important to note that bullying is a very different thing than it was 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. You know, when I was bullied, I was fortunate because at the end of the day, I got to go home. And when I went home, it let up a little bit. I didn't have to be experiencing it the entire day long. And the difference now is that for a lot of young people, they might go home and then they will get a text message that reminds them of what's going on at school, or something will happen on Facebook, or will happen on Twitter, or will happen, you know, in one of the other various online mediums that students can be kind of terrible to one another. So within that, I just want to stress that that nowadays bullying is 24 hours a day, and occasionally, actually just last or 2 weeks ago when I was working with a school, I had a parent say to me, "Well, you know, I was bullied and I survived. Why are kids having such a hard time surviving today?" And I wanted to talk to them. I sat down with that parent and I talked to them about how it's a very different thing now because of the way that it can be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year with cell phones and the internet. And the other thing that's interesting about that is that there's an, an indication that when we can't see the way that a person's face reacts to the terrible thing that we might have just called them, or we can't see how it's impacting them because of the hurt that we see in that person, it makes it very difficult to empathize. And so as we're trying to teach young people how to empathize, it's really tough when you know they don't have the ability to just look at that person's face and understand what's going on there. And so, you know, I'm reading a book right now that I'm not very far into, but what I've read so far I really like, and you might consider checking it out. It's by Mary Gordon. I'll say that name one more time, Mary Gordon, and it is called The Roots of Empathy. And it's sort of looking at how can we better build empathy in young people as one of the ways to begin to prevent bullying. So before I get into, so the next thing that we're going to do is start getting into those 5 actions that we promised you. But first, I just want to see if Sandra might be able to help me out if there were any questions that came up when I was talking about the nature of modern bullying. Sandra, are there any things that came up?
Nope. It looks like
No
everybody
questions?
understood. If you do have a question, you can feel free to type it in now. If not, there'll
Okay,
be time later. But it looks like
okay,
most people
great.
understood.
Great, excellent. Um, and so I think as we get into the 5 actions that you can take, I think it's really important just to remember these 2 things. Remember that bullying is more often than not identity based, and that it tends to be, whoops, excuse me, 24 hours a day, happening just sort of in ways that are unprecedented, that have never happened before. So let's get into these actions. And again, if you have questions about any of these, I would be happy to unpack them and answer your questions and dig in a little bit more to these actions. But as parents, I think one of the most important things that we can do as we are looking to help protect our children is to look for signs of bullying. Because one of the things that I know about myself is when I was in middle school, I was being bullied daily, and it was really really bad, and it got to the point where I felt so lonely and so isolated that I hate saying it, but I seriously considered suicide because of the way that bullying was affecting my life. And that was before the age of cell phones and the age of Facebook and Twitter. And so it's no wonder to me that we're seeing more and more cases of students who are going that far. But what's interesting about me is that my parents, I don't think had very much of an idea. I never told them. I never talked to them about it. And so as a result, they knew that I was kind of having a hard time, but I don't think they quite understood that it was bullying. And similarly, I'm not sure how much the teachers really saw it in the same way that I was experiencing it. And so I'm not sure that they fully understood what all was going on. And so some of the things that we can start to do that research indicates is that there are certain signs that your young person is being bullied. Now, these signs don't necessarily mean that your student is being bullied. It could mean a lot of different things. It could mean that as their hormones change, they're struggling and feeling more sad or something along those lines. But if you're seeing these signs, it's important to identify them so that we can start to talk to our students about them. So I'll go through these and then I'll talk about what we can do with this. So the first sign that we might notice is, has your student stopped doing things that they enjoy, or is there a particular thing that they really enjoy that they've stopped doing? That might be an indication that A, they're depressed because of the way that they're being bullied, or that the thing that they enjoy doing is part of how they're being bullied, right? So maybe they're being made fun of for that thing that they really enjoy doing. And so as a result, they don't want to do it because they're afraid of being made fun of. The next thing to look for is, has your student expressed a sudden or progressive, sad, or sullen attitude? Again, that could be for a lot of different reasons that your student is feeling sad or sullen, but it's important to note that when students are being bullied, they are going to be coming home feeling sad or upset. They're going to generally kind of be showing signs of depression in their day-to-day life. Similarly, have they expressed a sudden or progressive angry attitude? I know that for me, when I was bullied, unfortunately, I hate to say it, I ended up taking it out on the other people in my life. I was really angry and mean to my parents and to some of my friends and to my sisters. And again, I think sometimes when kids are having hormonal changes, they just get a little, they're more likely to yell at you or to be rude or to be mean. But if it's something that's a pattern where they're becoming suddenly more angry or progressively more angry, it might be time to talk to them about what's going on and what's making them feel that way, because it might be a sign of bullying. And then another one here that relates to the identity-based bullying, or the nature of bullying being identity-based, is that if they've expressed a sudden or progressive self-consciousness about some aspect of their identity. So maybe, for instance, so they've recently started to express some self-consciousness or not feeling good about their skin color. In the school where I taught, students who I taught in a school that was almost exclusively African American, and the bullying that existed that was race related in that school was that kids who were more dark skinned than kids who were light skinned got made fun of a lot for that. And so maybe, for instance, one of those kids might go home and start to be down on themselves about their darker skin color. Or maybe it's that they are sort of down on themselves for the way that they express their gender identity, or whatever it might be. The point being is that if they show that self-consciousness about that aspect of their identity in particular, that might be more than just this awkward self-consciousness that comes with growing up. It might be that they're being made fun of for it. So again, for me, I don't personally identify as gay, but I was bullied because I was perceived to be gay, because I'm a little bit more effeminate, and I'm a little bit in sort of the way that I talk and the way that I dress and the way that I act. And so I got really self-conscious about that. And what my parents might have noticed is, as a result, I started overcompensating and trying to act as masculine as I possibly could. And so that was how I expressed my self-consciousness about my identity. And then the last thing on this particular slide, has your student been reluctant or afraid to attend school? Now, at one time or another, as any parent knows, students are reluctant to go to school because they are bored or tired. They would rather, hang out at home and go play or play video games or whatever it might be. But if it becomes a regular pattern, and if as you investigate it, they seem like they might be afraid, or they actually voice that they might be afraid, that is a telltale sign of bullying behavior going on at school. Now, obviously, this is not comprehensive, and we're trying to keep our webinar to about an hour. This is, not the most comprehensive list that is out there, but it can kind of give you a sense of what that looks like to begin the process of identifying when your student might be bullied. And I think that that's the first step that we have to be willing to take. But then once we've identified it, it's important that we talk to them about it, that we find ways that we can engage them, and if nothing else, remind them that we love them and that we recognize that this is happening, that we see that they're suddenly being sad or sullen, or we see that they're being angry or that they're being self-conscious about their identity or whatever it might be. And that's one of the things that surprises me the most is that I'll be talking to some parents and they're like, I don't have that many conversations with my kid. And I'm like, okay, well, that's a place to start. Let's see if we can think of some creative ways that you can start to bridge that gap where you're not having a ton of conversations now, but let's see if we can get there so that then you can talk to them a little bit more easily once this happens. Um, so before we move on to our second action, I'm going to turn on my webcam so that you can kind of see me while I'm chatting with you. And Sandra, were there any questions that popped up during that?
We don't have any questions that came through while you were talking, but if anybody has one they want to share, please do so. Alternatively, you could, if you
Yeah,
want
sure. Are there any
to.
questions about looking for signs of bullying? The thing about it is it seems really simplistic and it seems really obvious, but it's something that I find a lot parents haven't necessarily put the pieces together in this same way and noticed that these things are happening to question whether or not that might be because of bullying. So even though it seems obvious, are there any questions that I need to clarify before we, oops, excuse me, move on? Go
Uh,
back to the last slide
it's
there.
like Eric raised his hand, so I'm going to unmute you, and that might be an easier way than doing a question. Eric, was that a
Sure.
question that you wanted to share?
Looks like he might be typing it in.
Okay. Ah, right. So Eric says, have you seen cases of teachers bullying their students by being unfair to them?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that we do in civil schools is we do a teacher professional development. And in that professional development, I try to really stress, because I used to be a teacher myself, that teachers sometimes are the worst bullies in the school. And I say that with a lot of love for teachers as a former teacher myself. And so I tell them, I'll tell you that really quickly the story that I always tell the teachers when I'm doing this part of the professional development. When I was teaching, there was a student who, I'm trying to remember whether this was my first or second year teaching. But anyway, I was really stressed out because I was a new teacher, right? And that's a really stressful part of teaching is trying to stay on top of things in your first year. And um, I had this student who from day one was really combative. She was really rude and she was difficult in class. And I taught in a high school, and essentially the way I responded was I was after a while I just got kind of rude back. You know, I responded with sort of power over, trying to express that power over rather than trying to build power through her in the classroom by engaging her and trying to figure out what was going on. And so I was honestly really terrible to her. And I say this with a tremendous amount of shame. But I tell the story, you know, I'm very much ashamed of how I acted. But I tell the story to help people, teachers particularly, understand how much we can be bullies. Because in essence, I was bullying her on a fairly regular basis. When she would act out in class, I was really rude to her. And I would more and more often have to kick her out of class because it would escalate. And then after a while, she just stopped showing up to my classroom. And I had 178 students that I taught, and so I didn't think a ton of it. I was like, okay, well, if she doesn't want to learn, she's not going to come to my class, right? And then toward the end of that quarter, her mom reached out and said, you know, I'd like to have a meeting with you and my daughter. And I got really defensive, but I was like, okay, well, we'll have this meeting. And I kind of went into the meeting thinking, okay, this is, you know, I'm gonna have to put up my shields here and protect myself because she's gonna just defend her daughter despite the fact that her daughter was being out of pocket and out of hand. And when we sat down, her mom asked me for my side first. She was like, well, tell me what's going on. And I described her behavior. And legitimately, her behavior was not good. But the way I reacted was not better. In fact, it was arguably worse. And so, in response, her mom looked at my student and her daughter and said, you know, what do you have to say? And she just immediately burst into tears. And then her mom looked back at me and she said, Mr. Utt, you've really hurt my daughter. You've broken my daughter. And I got defensive. I was like, but from day one, she was really combative. And her mom stopped me and she said, did you think to ask why she was so combative? And it turns out that a little bit before the school year started, her dad had died. And so she was angry, and I bullied her. And I have a tremendous amount of shame about that. But I had to remember that even if she was being combative in my classroom, it was my responsibility to be the adult and to figure out why and to reach out to her and to her family. And I didn't do that. And so I tell you this story because, Eric, I think it's important to recognize that, yes, teachers are sometimes the worst bullies in the classroom, and that it's okay to acknowledge that so that then we can be better, so that we don't have to be that way anymore. So, Eric, do me a favor and raise your hand if that kind of helped, if that answered your question, if you're able to do the little hand raise. Okay, good, good, great. Um, Sandra, while I was saying that, did any other questions come up? Because if not, I'll turn off the webcam and go to the um, next slide.
Yeah, we did. Actually,
Okay.
Eric responded, as an ex-teacher, how can parents take action against a teacher who's bullying a child when so many school administrators don't want to even acknowledge any problems, whether the bullying's from the teacher or from other kids? And Joanne also shared her own experience that her older daughter was kept out of the gifted and talented program in elementary school because the teacher didn't like her.
Yeah, and so I'm going to table that question for just a minute, Eric, because I'm going to address it a little bit in one of our action steps, because I'm kind of preempting that question with one of the action steps. So I'll come back to it and make sure that that answers your question. But why don't we then move on to action two? And thank you both for sharing, because I think that is way more common than we like to admit, especially as teachers. It's important that we acknowledge that. So the second step, before we get into the steps that I think will help when teachers are being the bullies, is to engage with your students online or cellular world. So more and more. So if you have a kid who's not even yet in school, they're in pre-K or something, it's coming soon. And so you can get out ahead of the curve. And for those of you who have students who are in middle school and high school, it's important to acknowledge that we have to find a way to where from the earliest ages, we need to be discussing, internet safety and etiquette with our young people. And I just find, unfortunately, not a lot of parents are even just having that conversation. And sometimes I think it's parents tell me that they're just not sure how. And so even just talking to students about, if you wouldn't be able to say something to someone's face, why would you post it on Facebook? And talk to them about a really common form of bullying on social media is to hack other people's accounts. So to break into their account either because they left it up on a computer or to figure out their password, and start posting as them and saying really terrible things about the student. So things like that, and talking to them about, first of all, how inappropriate that is, but also how we really should be conducting. If we wouldn't say that terrible thing to someone's face, then why would we do that on the internet or in a text message or something along those lines? And if we start that from a really young age, then it's definitely going to help, especially realizing that I find a lot of parents aren't necessarily having that conversation. Um, but then the next thing that we have to ask ourselves is, do we know our students' passwords and about all the different accounts that they have and that they use? Now that's going to get a lot harder as they get older, right? So I'm sure for our student or for our parents who have high school age students or older, you recognize that that's not always realistic to know about all of the accounts because they might know more about using computers than we do, right? And that's a struggle that I know that I sometimes have, is I try really hard to stay abreast of this stuff because of the work that I do, and I still don't even always know. People are like, "Oh yeah," they were talking about a program called Kick the other day, and I was like, "I don't even know what that is," but some students were talking about it, and they were talking about how bullying happens on Kick, and so trying to listen and hear about that, and then asking ourselves whether or not we know about their passwords and about all their accounts, and I'll explain why in just a second. But the other thing that we can do is we can friend them on Facebook or follow them on Twitter or things along those lines. And obviously, the students aren't going to always be really happy about that. And they might protect their accounts so that you can't see everything that's going on. But if from an early age we create an expectation that, oh yeah, it's totally great if you want to have a Facebook account, once you decide with your student that it's age appropriate for them to have one. If they want one, then great, sure. But just so you know, I'm going to have your password, and I'm also going to, be your friend on Facebook so that I can see what's going on. That's an important thing. And again, that gets more and more difficult as they get older because they're not necessarily going to want you following them on Twitter. And I often have students tell me that the reason they don't really use Facebook as much anymore, they started using other platforms because their grandma or their mom or somebody is on Facebook, and when they post something, then they get a comment from grandma. But it's important to recognize that as much as possible that we engage with them online. I sometimes have parents who are like, I just don't even want to know. I don't even want to, friend them on Facebook, because I don't even want to see all the crap that they're posting. It's like, well, actually, it's really important that we do that. But then beyond that, if we suspect bullying behavior, either that our student is committing bullying behavior or that they are being bullied, then it's important that we check in with ourselves about whether or not we might be able to read their text messages or their emails or their private social media messages. And this is where it gets tough because it's about balancing trusting our students and their own privacy and their rights to privacy, but also our concern for them needs to be balanced in with that. And I think every parent has to decide what this is going to look like for them. There's not an easy way to just say this is how you should do this, but having conversations with your young people, with your incredible children about what this is going to look like for them is important because sometimes we might need to just get into their social media account and realize that, oh my gosh, they've been receiving a lot of really terrible messages. Again, remembering that I didn't tell my parents when I was close to committing suicide because of bullying, and they didn't even know that that was going on at school, at least not to the scale that it was. And so we have to be proactive, and that's tough. And again, the older they are, the more we're going to have to talk to them about how we're going to have to trust them online because we can't know everything that they're doing online. But if we start from an early age and we build a trusting relationship with them over time about what they're doing online, then it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier when they get to that age to just say, okay, well, now I trust you and I trust that you're gonna engage well, and if you need help, you're gonna talk to me. So are there any questions about engaging with your students online or cellular world? This one's really tough because, again, it's really hard to know what that should look like for you, and it might look different for you than for the next parent. But are there any questions about
Yep.
that you might want to
Michelle
throw out?
asks, to what age is it okay to have a child's password or access to their text messages?
Well, I would say I don't know that I could say that it's that simple of that age. I think it's about your relationship with your student and whether or not you've been able to have that conversation to where you trust them. Does that make sense? Like, for me, it would depend on how much if I had never, been engaging with their online presence or any of that, and I just suddenly was like, I need your passwords and I want to read all of your text messages, then that's going to come off as really invading their privacy, almost no matter what age. But if we build up that conversation and begin to have it, then at an earlier age, then hopefully that they'll be more comfortable. But I would say that by the time they're hitting ninth or 10th grade, we should start to be able to have conversations with them about, actually, so if you want to change your password so I don't have it, that's okay. Um, I'm just really trusting you with that, and have a conversation about how we're trusting them with that and about how that's something that we're putting in their hands rather than saying, you know, um, it's a privilege, not a right, that kind of stuff, which might be an important conversation. Then flipping that conversation around and saying, but I really trust you, and I want you to be able to have your own stuff that I'm not a part of. But before that, I would say even through middle school, it's important to have some degree of engagement. But you have to really decide what that's going to look like for you and your student. I meant to turn this on during the Q&A. Any other questions that came up there, Sandra?
Not a question, but Joanne did share that she at first didn't think her son was on Twitter since he said he didn't like it. but then later
Mm.
found it through his friends, and it was a Twitter not tied to his real name. So now she kind of stalks him a bit on Twitter, just not posting, but just checking out what's going on. So that's one way a parent is doing it.
Yeah, and I think that again, that some parents try to do it totally anonymously. I've talked to parents who are like, "Yeah, I made a fake Twitter account myself so that I could follow them without them knowing." And again, that's about how what your level of comfort is. And if that's something that you want to do, then that's your place to do that with your student. And some parents might feel like they need to do that. With my older sister, my parents probably would have had to do that because she was really rebellious, right? As opposed to with me, they might have had an easier time talking to me about it than they would have with my older sister.
Great.
Any other thoughts on this one before we get into kind of starting to answer the question that Eric asked about what do you do when teachers are being bullies? Any other questions there?
It looks like we're good for now.
Great, then let's move on. So the next thing that you can do that starts to help, and this is the step sort of before how you might be able to engage with the parent or with the teacher, excuse me, who's being bullied, is what I always encourage parents to do is build a parenting network. And I don't always know exactly what that has to look like. That can look a million different ways. But here's the thing to consider. If you have something like a parent advocacy organization within your school, whether that's a PTA or something else, that might be a place to do it. But also, I'm seeing more and more parents who are creating sort of like, I don't know if you'd call it a club or an organization or whatever, that parents can join. That's a concern. It's essentially sort of like an organization that's specifically focused on culture and climate in the school and building positive and inclusive culture and climate in the school because parents are realizing that teachers also need help with that. That's one of the things that as a former teacher I can tell you is that it's hard to feel like we're doing it on our own as teachers, that we are the only ones trying to build culture and climate because sometimes it feels like the students aren't doing it and the administration is too busy focused on other things. And so if we have parents who are like, oh yeah, we're going to create this organization that meets occasionally or something, but that you can go to if you feel like you need help building positive culture and climate, then we can do that. And so thinking about something along those lines, building an advocacy organization at your school. Another thing might be that is if you suspect bullying, one of the things that you can do is if you have a parent network, you can start to reach out to the parents of other students. If you don't have a parent network, if you don't know who the other parents are, it's really tough to do that. So like if you know that other students might be maybe your students' friends or your kids' friends, parents, you can start to reach out to them. But then it's important to get outside of even your own social networks and talk to other parents and say, is anyone else noticing that this is happening in our school? What do you think we should do about it as parents who really love our kids? But then also, if you know the names of the students who are exhibiting bullying behavior, then sometimes you can reach out to them. A lot of times, honestly, more often than not, the parents don't realize exactly what their kids are doing, right? They don't realize how their student is acting at school. And so you can reach out to them. Now, you might run into some defensiveness, right? I know that whenever I get criticized, I get defensive. And so if a parent's getting having their kid criticized to them, then they might get a little bit defensive. So it's important to then think about coming at that from an angle of not like, you need to get your kid in control, even if we feel that way, and even if we want to yell at them because of the way that their student is hurting our child. It's important then to be like, okay, well, so I'm really concerned, and I just want to make sure that we're getting both of our children the resources they need so that bullying isn't happening at school. One of the things that's really hard, especially I think for parents to remember, and I run into the defensiveness about this a lot, is that in the majority of cases that exist where students are exhibiting bullying behavior, a pretty strong majority, the students are exhibiting that bullying behavior in part and related to another something else that's happening in their life. Let me rephrase that. It's happening in relation to something else that's happening in their life. So most kids who are exhibiting bullying behavior are really struggling with something. Maybe they're struggling with something that's happening at home, or maybe like in my case, they're being bullied and so they're taking it out on other people. I have to say I was the worst bully of them all to kids who were supposed to be my friends, And it was because I was so fed up with how I was teaching and I didn't, or I mean, excuse me, with how I was being treated, and I didn't know how to deal with it. And so I started being a jerk to other people. And so if parents have a network where they can talk to each other about this, that's really important. So you can do things like parent listservs or a Facebook group so that it's easy in our busy schedules to have this communication. You know, if you have a parent listserv that parents can join, then they can send a message and say, hey, I've started noticing X, Y, or Z. Is anybody else noticing this, or is this just a thing with my child that I need to address individually? Or, you know, reaching out for help from other parents. Because parents, you all, I mean, the vast majority of parents want what's best for their kids. And so it's important um, that we have networks so we can take care of each other and we can share ideas in how we might begin to address bullying. And then this will begin in the next slide, Eric, to answer your question, because when you have a parenting network, it can help you when you start to talk to the school. But are there any questions directly about building a parenting network?
None that have come through while you've been talking. If anybody wants to type it in now, please go ahead.
Yeah, maybe raise your hand so we know you're typing if you're typing in a question. Otherwise, we'll head
We'll
on to
move
the
on.
next one.
It looks like
Any,
Emily is
any,
going to type, so we'll wait a
okay,
minute.
great, great. We'll just wait for 1 second then while we get that question through. But again, it's something that is more and more important for us to have nowadays than at any other time because the bullying is happening in new and different ways than it's ever happened before. Were we able to get that question through, or do we want to try to unmute Emily? Is that another option?
Yeah, let me try to unmute and see.
So it looks
Emily.
like you're unmuted, Emily, if you just want to ask your question that way.
Oh, she typed it. I've been
Can you hear
trying.
me?
Oh, great.
Oh,
I'm here. So I have been trying to reach out to the parent of the little girl who was doing the bullying, and she has refused to engage with me over time. I actually just had some success with the administration, but it's really hard to see that the parent doesn't have any concern about her child's behavior.
Yeah. And I think that, like I said, that's something that is probably going to happen sometimes. And so that's where having other parents who can support you when you go to the administration, which is kind of in the next, the fourth action relates to, okay, well, if you can't directly go to the parents, what do you do? Is really important. But if you, for instance, maybe the little girl who is exhibiting bullying behavior is doing it to more than one student, right?
She
And
is, yes,
so
she is.
um, and so if you know because you have a parent network, you can put out there, hey, is anybody else experiencing this kind of thing that's going on? Let's talk. Then you might be able to identify, oh, it's coming from the same person. But sometimes one of the reasons that parents might be defensive is that maybe the reason that, like I said, majority of bullying behavior is linked by research directly to something they're struggling with in their own lives. Sometimes the thing that they're struggling with is the way that their own parent is bullying them or even abusing them. And I don't know if that's the case in this instance, but that's where we can only go so far actually directly reaching out to that parent. We have to look at other options.
Hmm.
Does that make sense, Emily? Does that
Y-
help?
y- yes, thank you.
Good, great. Um, any other questions that came through there, Sandra, before we move on to the fourth action?
no, looks like that's it.
Okay, great. Well, then for now, we'll move on, and if questions come through, you can type them out. So this next one is going to really begin to address that question that Eric had, and I think it relates to what Emily was just asking, which is what do you do if other things haven't been working and the teacher doesn't want to hear that they're being a bully or a jerk. One of the things that I always say to every single parent that I meet in every community all over where I work is that the best thing that we can do is to begin even before we're trying to address something related to the bullying to begin to build a, a proactive relationship with our school. And so what I always say within that is that first of all, having a proactive relationship is really vital when you need to be reactive, right? So if you already have a relationship with people within the school, it's a lot easier to address something when something bad is happening and you need to react to it. And so what I always say is to start to ask yourself, okay, who are my allies in the school community? And identify those allies and start to build a relationship with them, right? So if you know that your kid has a really great relationship with this person in the building, they talk about how nice this teacher is, or maybe the front office person is really kind to them. I remember when I was in elementary school, I always loved trying to bop my head in and say hi to this woman we called Mrs. T, who was in the office. So maybe she might have been an ally for my parents, but starting with those allies and then cultivate that relationship. And whatever that looks like for you, you can do. Whether it's that you have a positive email relationship with that person where you email them and say, hey, I just want to let you know that I really appreciate the work that you do. Or maybe for you, it's that, when you have some spare time, I don't know what parents have spare time, but if you have some spare time, you could make them some cookies. I don't know what it might be, whatever it is for you that you might want to do. And then you could have that sort of positive relationship when it's time to lean on them if traditional routes aren't working. So this gets to what I was talking about, or it gets to the question, excuse me, that Eric was asking, which is that what happens when a teacher is being the bully and the administration doesn't necessarily want to address the problem, or doesn't want to think about the problem, and doesn't want to believe that it's happening, or that teacher, this is where having allies in the school is vital, because I guarantee there's at least one person in that school that you can build a positive relationship with, who can be your advocate within the community, right? So if they're marginalizing you because you're not a teacher, or you don't have the same experience that they do, or they just don't want to deal with you because they think you're being bothersome, if you have an ally in the building who can help you, that's going to be vital. And so that's building that proactive relationship and figuring out who are your allies is important. But then also, if you have that parent network, it's a lot easier to help the school understand that it's about more than one family, that this is a bigger issue than just you, and you should not marginalize me, because you need to realize that this is happening in a lot of different ways to a lot of different parents across different age groups, right? So that your parent network is not just all the student or the parents of the people who are in your grade. And when they've got one parent who's calling and saying, hey, I'm really worried about my kid and I feel like I want your help in this, then it might be easier for them to marginalize you. Versus if they've got 10 parents or 15 parents, and then those 10 or 15 parents bring on board 3 or 4 teachers who are their allies, then it looks really different, and the administration has a lot harder of a time saying, oh, actually, I don't think this is something we need to focus on right now, because we're focusing on our achievement data or whatever. Now, and that's not to vilify the teachers or the administrators, because I think that it's really easy to get so laser-like focused on all of the other things that are going on that we accidentally or sometimes intentionally marginalize the experience of individual people. But if a teacher, for instance, if another teacher had come to me and said, hey, I really respect you and I think that you're a fantastic teacher, and I'm worried about the relationship that you have with this particular student, referring to the girl that I was bullying, I might have heard that differently, right? That I might have been a little bit less defensive over time if another teacher were talking to me about that, because it would make me realize, okay, it's coming from more than one place. It's not just the parent, or it's not just the administration, or it's sort of everyone who's concerned about this. So again, having that proactive relationship and deciding, okay, these are the people I know I can trust in the school, and then when things are not going the way that I want them to go, I'm going to lean into those allies. That it can be a really powerful way to get around if you have an administrator who's resistant, or if you have a teacher who's resistant, or another parent who's resistant to the conversation. So any questions about that one?
Not
Before we
right
move on
now, but if you have
to our
one,
last one.
please raise your hand so we know that you're typing in a question for us.
Excellent. And I think I'll just say one more thing about this one. This is something that I realized as a teacher gets overlooked a lot, is that there are sometimes, that I really enjoyed when I had a really positive, proactive relationship with parents. But then it also helped me if I felt like I saw bullying behavior, I could reach out to that parent and say, "Hey, have you heard of this happening with any of the other kids? I want to see if we can identify that this is a pattern or this is a larger problem." So again, that it goes both ways. When you have that proactive ally relationship with the educators, they might also reach out to you to engage you in building positive culture and climate in the school. All right, well then let's move on to our last one here. So one of the most important things to recognize is that as one individual within a school community, there's only so much that we can do, and we have to be asking tough questions of our school. And this is where having, for instance, a parent network is vitally important, because we have to ask questions like, have our teachers been trained, right? There are ways that they can develop themselves professionally, professional development training, such as the ones that civil schools offer, or other options. But the point being is that we have to ask, are they being trained to recognize bullying behavior and to intervene appropriately? Do they even know what it would look like to intervene? One of the most shocking things to me, but most important things to me, is when I'm leading professional development. Just the other day, I was in New York City working with a school, and the teachers, just one of their most common concerns is they felt like they had no idea how to best intervene. They're like, we just don't know what to do. Tell us. And so we spent an hour and a half talking about appropriate interventions that they can use. And they designed them themselves. I just led them through the process of designing them. But if that kind of conversation isn't happening, then the best thing we can do as parents is really, as a community of parents, advocate for a more comprehensive approach. Similarly, have our students been offered training on how to intervene when they see bullying? Uh, we can't just expect that students know how to be an upstander, right? That they stand up when they see bullying as opposed to being a bystander and just sort of letting it pass them by. There are ways that we can offer them tools, but if the school is not prioritizing it, we have to be the ones who are advocating for a comprehensive approach. And then again, what sort of curriculum is our school using that might address bullying more systematically, or that might encourage more inclusive environments? How are the things that they're teaching encouraging more inclusive environments where they build relationships with other students? And do they have curriculum that directly addresses bullying that they're using in their classrooms in one way or another? And so we really have to be the people who are advocating for that and encouraging the administration to take it seriously. Because, and I completely understand this, the administration feels like they are pressed for time, right? They're like, oh, we just don't have enough time. That's not the highest priority, so we're not going to give our professional development time to that. We're instead going to do something that's going to raise our test scores by, um, uh, doing a reading strategy, doing a new reading strategy thing. But one of the things that you can tell them is, actually, there's an article at civilschools.com that talks about the research that indicates when students feel safe and secure in their school environment, they will achieve at higher levels and learn better. So we can speak their language. When administrators are so worried about achievement, we can say, I want to make sure that the teachers are trained because I want my student to achieve better. I'm actually on the same page with you about that. So let's make sure that all students feel safe and that bullying isn't happening, because my student will learn better when they're not being bullied. So it's just important that we're advocating for that comprehensive approach. So I noticed that Eric's hand went up. Were there any other questions for this one?
Yeah, Eric had a comment to make that there are districts with zero tolerance policies that parents don't like, and because if the bully's
Yes.
if the child wants to retaliate, or if another child wants to intervene, then that child can actually often get in more trouble than the one who is exhibiting bullying behavior.
Yes. I have to say, Eric, I'm just like I'm nodding my head because I agree with you so much. I think it is a tremendous shame that there have been laws passed in 49 of the 50 states to address bullying that are not research-based laws, and that 47 of the 50 states have zero tolerance policies now mandated by law. And the problem with that is it really ties people's hands about how they can begin to address the problem. For instance, like you said, if a student stands up for themselves, that can sometimes get them in just as much trouble as the person who's exhibiting bullying behavior. Also, if we simply just pretend that we can just expel students who are bullying and that will solve the problem, then we're missing the point that this is a problem of culture and climate, right? It's bigger than one student, and that we need to build a different kind of culture and climate. We have to be proactive and not just reactive using punitive measures. And so I couldn't agree with you more, Eric, which is why, again, if we can start to build that proactive relationship, we can offer alternatives to our schools. And then if they feel like their hands are tied because of the legislature, then it's our responsibility as parents to say to our representatives, I do not support a zero tolerance approach. It's not supported by research to be effective, and it doesn't actually help end bullying. All it does is make us feel better because we're punishing the individual by expelling them. And that, sure, if we need punitive measures as part of the wider picture, great, but there has to be more than that. So I agree with you 100%, Eric. I noticed that also Joanne had her hand up. Was there another question there?
Yeah, Joanne was just sharing her experience about her older daughter who had been bullied during gym last year in high school, and she talked to teachers and nothing happened. Joanne talked to the principals and nothing happened. And then she talked to the bullying specialist at the school, no response, and finally wrote to guidance and forwarded all her conversations. And then finally a complaint was filed, but the kid who was exhibiting bullying behavior never had any repercussions, and her own daughter was not allowed to change her class. So just um,
Yeah, well, and so Joanne, one of the things that I just want to stress that I heard that's a really important best practice that you mentioned is it said that you forwarded all of your communications. The more we can document what's happening, the more we can advocate better for ourselves. But again, what I would guess was probably happening based on the amount of times that I've heard that same type of story, which just makes me so sad there, Joanne, is that they were treating you like this was an isolated incident versus if you can find other parents who are saying, yeah, this is actually, we feel this way too, and we want to see a comprehensive approach. And you've got 10 parents who are saying this is not okay, this is happening to our students and they're being targeted, and we don't want to see the kind of thing that's happening where students are taking their lives and that kind of stuff. Then you might be able to help with that. And the other thing that I would recommend is when we're talking about it, if we can speak, and I hate having to do this. I wish we didn't have to do this, but so often we have to speak to the pain points of the administrators and point out, like, you realize the kind of national attention that is now being drawn to bullying, and if we don't address this, we're going to be like, just last week there was national attention to a story where two girls are being charged with criminal charges because a young woman committed suicide after being bullied and got to the point where she couldn't take it anymore. And so, trying to help speak to that pain point of like, do we want to be that community that's in the national headlines? Because people, I can talk to 10 other parents. Here they are, who are people who are experiencing this as well. And so, Joanne, I'm really sorry that happened to you. I hate hearing that schools are marginalizing this experience. And so hopefully, again, pairing what allies you might have with helping them understand that it's not just you is the kind of thing that can push for a more comprehensive approach.
yeah,
Any
and
other
Jo
comments or questions there, Sandra?
yeah, and Joanne also shared that she was able, after when she went to guidance, the guidance questioned some other students and realized what was going on, as well as another teacher. So, so
Yeah.
that was also
Good.
able
And
to.
well, and that's the nice thing is right there, you just identified that the particular person in guidance might be a good ally. And then if you have a parent network, you can share that with the other parents and say, this is a person who cares, who gets it. We need to support this person and make sure that they have the resources they need.
Mhm. We have
Any other
another
questions?
question also from Michelle, who's a clinical psychology intern, and is
Great.
asking, as a therapist, how can she convince or orient a parent that bullying is a real thing? As some parents she's encountered in therapy think that kids should just suck it up. And if
Yeah.
they're suffering, they're reluctant to do anything about it, especially if it's a male student.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, well, a couple of things that I would say to that is one of the main reasons that I encounter when I hear parents say that students should just suck it up is because they don't understand the way that bullying is actually taking place nowadays. Um, So as a place to start, you might consider trying to explain a couple of things. First of all, how very much identity-based bullying tends to be nowadays, and how that is likely to hurt someone in a much deeper way than other forms of bullying that might be more surface level, such as maybe just because they like a particular sport or something like that. Which that's not to minimize that type of bullying, but that it might help them understand, if someone's really being made fun of for core aspects of who they feel like they are, then it's likely to hurt them more. But the other thing is, I almost every time that I give a parent talk, have parents say that kind of thing. Like they just need to suck it up, or they say I was bullied and I survived. And so helping them understand just how different modern day bullying is than it's ever been before, and how the constant trauma of 24 hours a day being marginalized and being hurt and being told such terrible things is very different than what I experienced as a young person when I just had it during generally the school day, or maybe during a sports practice after school. And so starting there to help them understand just how different bullying is now than it's ever been before might help break through that. But then beyond that, if you can start to highlight the real stories of people who've been survivors of bullying, especially modern bullying, you might be able to help them get that connect on that personal level. So telling them the stories in great detail about the young people who have been bullied to the point where they felt like they couldn't take it anymore. There's unfortunately too many of those stories, and it breaks my heart to realize how many of those stories that there are. But to help them connect on a personal level rather than an analytical level might also help. Any other questions before we wrap up?
Yeah, we have another question from Eric.
Great.
He says, glad you're addressing this, but please address how bullying has changed from 20 years ago. Now bullies can hide behind a cloak of anonymity on websites such as
Yes.
Topics, where you don't even have to register, say anything that they want against a kid, and it's there for everyone to see and other kids to pile on because no one knows who they are, and these sites are reluctant to share the poster's IP number. So just another example of how it's really different.
Yeah, exactly. And if we're sharing those kinds of things, and to recognize how, for instance, how hard it is to then hold someone accountable to that, then it might help get it through to the person who's not getting it. But then also that further stresses how important that action number two is, engaging with your students online and cellular world, and trying to understand, like looking at the browse history and knowing where they've been, and trying to engage with them so that if they're on sites like that, we can talk to them about it, and also talk to them about anonymity of the internet, and talk to them about how different it is to say something about someone when we can't see the terror that inflicts on them, and how we never actually get to see that. But then the other thing is, looking back at this step number 5, is when we think about a comprehensive approach, we also need to be training students to know how to intervene when they see that stuff, because we can't see it all the time. There's only so much that we as parents can see. So if we are offering our students effective tools for what they can do if they're on a website and see another person doing that, then they we can empower them to actually be the ones who change it, which I think is a pretty important thing that we can do. Which sort of leads us to just one thing that I wanted to say real quick is I want to give a little bit of information about Civil Schools so that you understand. So Civil Schools is an organization that offers sort of a unique and comprehensive approach to getting beyond just focusing on bullying, realizing that we've got to do a lot more than just react. We can't just be constantly in a state of reacting to bullying. Instead, the goal is to build a different kind of culture and climate in our school communities and online, where this kind of stuff isn't happening anymore. So what we offer is educator professional development, a full day of student upstander intervention training, resources for parents with videos and engagement materials, as well as advisory curriculum to engage all of the students in this. So what I'll just say is, if you are interested, we are actually piloting the program in this school year. And we've got about 6 spots left, so we're looking for 6 more schools, preferably schools that are between grades 6 and 12, that would be willing to essentially, for just covering our costs, would be willing to try the program and get the benefits out of the program in exchange for formative feedback, so that we can improve the program before we take it to the national level next year. So if you're interested, I know that after Sandra is going to be sending out, excuse me, an email that will have a link that you can follow if you're interested in the pilot program. And then the last thing that I will say is that if you are interested, you can also, I want to be a resource to you. I don't just want to be this, this voice that's on the other end of the webinar. So if you need support, if you're not sure what to do, you can reach out to me on Twitter, which is always an interesting way because it's directly content connected to me. If you wanted to look me up on Facebook, you could do that. But also, if you need to email me, my email is jamie@civilschools.com. So I'll kick it back over to Sandra. I know that I wanted to respect your time and try to keep it close to an hour, and we're at about an hour and 15 minutes now. So Sandra, is there anything you want to say to close us out?
I just want to really thank you, Jamie, so much for sharing your experience and your wisdom. Bringing 10 years of experience working with schools across the country. It's been really, really informative webinar, and I know that we've all gotten a lot out of it. So thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me as a guest. It's truly an honor to be able to work with you tonight.
Mhm. And as Jamie was just talking about, Civil Schools is really here to help everyone in the school system, from parents, students to educators, so they can all come together to create a bullying-free culture at your schools. So we will be sending you an email tomorrow with a recording of this webinar so you can have it to refer to, as well as a link to our bullying survival guide that has even more steps, actions that you can take. And if you are interested in bringing civil schools programming to your school, you can fill out a survey there, and then they'll get in contact. So, um, and you can learn more at civilschools.com. That's www.civilschools.com. So thank you again, Jamie, and thank you to everybody who could join us and shared their questions and their experiences.
Yes, thank you so much. It truly means a lot to be able to spend, I know you have very precious time as parents, and so thank you so much for taking some of that precious time to engage with us here today.
Mm-hmm. And we've gotten some thank you shout outs from Jessica and Joanne and Eric. So thank you again.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Take care.
Bye, everyone.